gotta do what I gotta do.
Hello and welcome to episode 4 of the MMA Rundown. My name is Ben Gordon. I'll be your host again. This week we're going to be going over the results at UFC London, and this was a really busy combat sports weekend. There was the UFC in London, there was World Series of Fighting, which I'm not going to be covering in this episode, the Gunnar Golovkin fight as well, that's not going to be covered in this episode. But I will be covering a couple of the main fights on UFC London, including Brad Pickett's retirement, Gunnar Nelson's win, where he'll go from there, the NCAA wrestling brackets, and the NCAA wrestling championships, those happened, so we'll cover that. Conor versus Floyd, Mighty Mouse, and a few other big topics from over the week. So to start off, we'll look at the UFC London results, and I'm just going to go from the bottom of the card to the top, make some quick comments where I feel necessary. So the first fight of the night was Lena Landsberg versus Lucy Pudilova. Landsberg won this fight 29-28 on all three judges' scorecards. Now, it looked like Pudilova was coming on strong towards the end. I think Landsberg won the first round. Second round seemed pretty close, but the third round definitely went to Lucy. I was surprised to see Lucy lost this fight. She was also pretty surprised. On Twitter afterwards, she was posting a bunch of pictures, kind of saying as much. So she was posting before and after pictures of Lena Landsberg and being like, I sent this bitch to the hospital, ha 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 ha. And I mean, I guess if you lose a fight you thought you won, that's what you would think to do. I don't know if that's something that you necessarily want to do, but it was kind of fun and kind of funny to see. In the next fight, there was Bradley Scott defeating Scott Askin by split decision. Not really the most exciting fight there. The fight after that, much different. Mark Jacasey versus Teemu Packalén. Jacasey was just coming out, throwing a bunch of spinning kicks, just getting really aggressive. Packalén seemed a little bit tentative, and Jacasey caught him with the right hand, and the way he went out, he just kind of like stopped, froze, fell over, and that was that. It was a really impressive fight for Jacasey. He's looked really good so far in the UFC, so I'd like to see him up against maybe either borderline top 15 guys or someone who actually is in the top 15 and see where he can work his way up from there, because he's got a lot of potential. Next fight was Leon Edwards versus Vicente Luque. Edwards looked really good in this fight. Luque is a very tough guy, so for Edwards to be able to beat him on the feet, did pretty good in the grappling exchanges as well, but his body kick was landing a lot, and that was really where he was able to score a lot and cause a lot of damage. The fight after that, another heavyweight fight that was completely boring. This was a battle of two top 15 heavyweights, and you wouldn't know if they didn't tell you. Between Timothy Johnson, who defeated Daniel Omielanchuk. Johnson, former Division II wrestler who wasn't really that effective in getting Omielanchuk to the ground. Omielanchuk is a guy with a striking background who wasn't particularly effective in keeping Johnson away or really doing a lot of damage to him. So, again, it just kind of shows the holes in the UFC heavyweight division. I think at some point they've got to figure out how they're going to get some better athletes into the division, because the guys who are in the top 10 right now are either really old or a lot of them are fairly unimpressive in terms of their athleticism. That's why a guy like Francis Gano, who's not exactly the most technical guy, is shining right now and is just rising to the top. The fight after that was Francimar Barros versus Darren Stewart. This was a rematch. The first fight, Stewart had, it looked as though he knocked him out with a headbutt, and on review they called it that, so it was a no contest. So Barros wins the decision 29-28 on all three judges' scorecards. And in the undercard main event, Joseph Duffy beat Reza Madadi by unanimous decision, outstruck him pretty much the whole time. Madadi was very game, but Duffy was much more technical and was able to use that to his advantage. Madadi was able to get to his shots and kind of work some wrestling in, but good job by Duffy to defend for the most part, and when he did go down, he got up pretty quick. On the main card, Arnold Allen defeated Makwan Amirkhani by split decision. I don't think it really should have been a split decision. I thought it was pretty clear for Allen, 30-27. And two of the judges gave it to him, 30-27. Amirkhani at his best, he was getting some submission attempts off his takedowns, but he wasn't really controlling a whole lot from the top. Even when he get on top, he really wasn't doing a ton of damage. The submission attempts didn't seem like they were ever that close, and once Allen got out, then Allen would get up and he'd start doing more damage and doing a lot more work. So I was kind of surprised to see it go to a split decision. But Allen looked really impressive, so it'll be cool to see where he goes from there. The second fight on the main card, and this one I'll get into a little bit later, was Marlon Vera defeating Brad Pickett in Pickett's retirement fight. The fight after that was Gunnar Nelson defeating Alan Jouban in the second round. Again, this one's another one that I'll get to a little bit later on in the episode. And the final one was the main event, which is Jimmy Manoa defeating Corey Anderson on a one-punch KO on the left hook that he kind of leapt in on and put him out, and didn't even need to follow up. It's just a walk-off KO. Really impressive for Manoa. The interesting part with Manoa is that he's in his late 30s right now. He's fought against two of the top four guys. If we were looking at the top four guys, you're looking at Rumble, you're looking at Gustafsson. DC and John Jones. He's fought against Rumble, he got knocked out. He fought against Gustafsson, got finished there as well. It seems as though he has he's had a lot of trouble against the top guys in the division, but he's been very successful against the guys who are beneath him. So at this point, I'm not sure what fight makes sense for him, because obviously Jones and DC, I don't know that he's quite yet deserving of a title shot. But if Jones isn't going to come back and take that title shot, Manoa, I guess, would be the next guy there. He also called out a boxer, but nobody really cares to see that fight. I definitely don't care to see it. In the co-main event, Gunnar Nelson went against Alain Jouban in what was a really exciting matchup between two top 15 guys in the welterweight division. It was going to be a matchup where you learned a lot about each of them as far as where they're at right now, where they can go next. For Jouban, he was 35 years old, really good kickboxer. He's a brown belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He's had some fights where he hasn't looked great, but he's had other fights where he's looked pretty good. So it was going to be interesting to see how he'd handle a guy like Gunnar Nelson, a guy who you'd imagine he'd have a striking advantage against. See how he could handle the wrestling, if he could keep the fight on the feet where he wants it. Maybe if he could even get on top, could he control? Could he kind of stay safe in the meantime? Obviously, that's not the game you want to play against Gunnar Nelson, but again, it'd be interesting to see that just based off of what his skill set is and how he can implement it. And then for Gunnar Nelson, he's a guy who had risen up around the top 10 before, lost to Damian Maia, took a couple steps back, and has worked his way back into the top 10 now. And now that he's got this really big win over Alain Jouban, it's going to be interesting to see where he goes next. So the finish came in the second round when Nelson cracked him with a straight right. As Jouban stepped back, he started to wobble, went up against the fence. Nelson threw a head kick. Jouban shot in. Nelson caught a guillotine and went down on his back, ended up getting on top of mount with it, and got a pretty quick tap from it. It looked like Jouban was pretty much done at that point, and I guess it was nice for him. If you're already rocked, you'd rather get finished with a guillotine choke by a guy like Gunnar Nelson than to get pounded out and have your face smashed in. And Gunnar even mentioned in the post-fight press conference that he's like, he's a model, I didn't want to mess up his face too much, which I thought was kind of a funny thing for Gunnar to say. So moving forward, I think for Jouban, this is going to be tough, because at 35 years old, if the goal for him is to make a title run, it just got a whole lot more complicated. You have to wonder what's he going to do to change his game to become more effective against the top guys in the division. His chin seems to be a little bit weakened at this point. He's been kickboxing for a long time. I'm sure he's taken a lot of shots in the gym. Obviously, he's taken shots in the octagon as well. So I don't think he's going to ever get to the point where he's going to be the best striker at welterweight. He's got a decent ground game, but it doesn't seem like it's at a point where he's going to start taking guys down and dominating them if need be. So for him, he can definitely hang around the top 15 as a fun fighter, but I don't know if he's ever really going to get beyond that. So at this point, he's making a lot of money modeling. I don't know what his desire is to compete in the sport, what his goals are, but if he wants to stick around and be a fun fighter, he can definitely do that. He definitely is a fun fighter to watch, but if his goal is to get to the title, it's not going to be easy, and I don't think it's going to happen. For Gunnar Nelson, I think it's even more interesting now, because he's going to be at a point now where if you look at who's available in the welterweight division, there are a lot of interesting options. So for one, if you want to look all the way up at the top, you can look at Stephen Thompson, who you'd have to figure is going to need a couple fights before he ever gets back into the title picture after having 2 straight title fights and not coming away with the belt. So Gunnar Nelson could be an option for him as far as, if you're looking at Stephen Thompson, if Thompson wins that fight, then he can win that fight, kind of kill some time in the meantime, let the welterweight division work itself out, get another fight, and then maybe after that, if he wins and if Tyron Woodley doesn't have the belt anymore, then all of a sudden he's ready for another title shot. If Gunnar Nelson wins that fight, of course, that's going to be a huge step for him, and that puts him pretty much in the title picture right away. So I'm not sure if that's the fight they're looking for, but it's definitely on the table. You could also look at Robbie Lawler, who hasn't fought since the Tyron Woodley fight. Nelson could be an interesting style matchup for him. Nelson can definitely hit hard. Obviously, he rocked Alain Jouban, but it's not like he's known as a hitter. So if this long layoff for Robbie Lawler has been based around head trauma, that might be the right fight to get back into it, to go against a grappler like Gunnar Nelson, one who I'd imagine that Nelson wouldn't be able to take Lawler down, so it could give Lawler a good chance to win. But if Nelson does take him down and does impose his game, again, that's a huge message for him to get a win over a former champion and a guy who defended his belt multiple times at that. If you're looking to go a little bit slower with Gunnar, you can look at some of the guys who are even in closer proximity. So you can look at Neil Magny. That's an interesting fight. Magny, the most similar fight that I can think of that Magny was in was against Damian Maia. Now, obviously, Maia and Nelson are fairly different in their games. Maia is much more effective at getting the fight to the ground and getting on top. Nelson can do it, but his wrestling isn't as effective. He he kind of just single shots a lot of his takedowns, whereas Mile will shoot in, and if he has to go to his back, and even almost sometimes it almost seems like he pulls mount or pulls half guard to work his way into a sweep, he'll do it. So a lot better with the chain wrestling, but if he can get Neil Magny down, there's a good chance for him to be able to win that fight. And again, that's a win over a guy who's just outside of the top 5. That pushes him closer, buys him a little bit more time to develop his game. I think at this point, that's really what the big question is if you're Gunnar Nelson and if you're John Kavanagh, do you feel like he's ready for the top right now, or do you want to give him a little bit more time, let him develop his game a little more? If you're looking to develop the game a little more, then that's probably a good fight to make. Outside of Magny, if you're looking at another guy in the top 10 that Gunnar Nelson could fight, you could look at Donald Cerrone. Now, Cerrone's coming off of a knockout loss to Jorge Masvidal. You like to see him get a little bit of time off. He's been very active. It looks like he's been taking a lot of shots. He took a lot of hard shots in the Matt Brown fight. It looked like that kind of rolled over into the Jorge Masvidal fight and didn't really help him look too good out there. So hopefully for him, he takes some time off. But even if he is ready to fight again and fight again soon, Leon Edwards had called him out. I think there are a lot of other really interesting matchups that he could possibly have within the top 10. So if you're looking at Gunnar Nelson, I think his next matchup is probably going to be between Wonderboy Thompson, if they're really, really looking to push him really fast. It could be Robbie Lawler, depending on what his schedule is, or it would be Neil Magny, who I think is the most likely next opponent for him. Second bout on the main card, Brad Pickett had his retirement fight with Marlon Chito Vera. This was going to be a really big fight for him because obviously this was the final fight that he was going to have. He was training out with American Top Team down in Florida, so he was moving out to England full-time afterwards. His big farewell fight, he actually got Reebok to push, or normally Reebok wants you to just wear the fight kit and the fight kit only. They were able to get it where he could come out with the suspenders that he used to come out with before Reebok. He came out with the hat that he used to come out with before Reebok, and he also had the newspaper, which is kind of like a cool classic look for him. And coming in, it was exciting. It was cool to see if he'd be able to get a win over a guy in Marlon Vera, who's very talented, who's very good, but he's not exactly a world beater at really any. I believe he fights at 145, but even if he were to make 35, it's not like he'd be a world beater. So it was a winnable matchup for him. Starting out early, looked really good for him. The first couple of rounds, on 2 of the 3 judges' scorecards, he had Brad Pickett had won 2 of the first 3 rounds. One of the judges had given Vera a round, so it was 2018, 2018, 1919. And it looked like as long as Pickett could just kind of stay alive, keep going, he'd be able to get the win. But the leg kicks were catching up to him from the earlier rounds. He wasn't able to get his takedowns, wasn't able to control the fight. And with a little over a minute left in the third, he got floored with a head kick. His hands were down by his side when he went down. He wasn't really protecting himself. He took a couple more shots. It looked as though he was out at the time. I know, obviously, with it being his retirement fight, you want to see him get every last chance he can to fight back. But it looked like that fight was over and the right call was made. So I have no issue with that fight being over. Afterwards, he left his hat in the middle of the octagon, had an emotional interview. Even Marlon Vera was a pretty big fan of him, so he was saying a lot of kind words about Brad Pickett. And, you know, it kind of sucks. Obviously, Pickett, he's 38 years old right now. He's not at a point where he's going to make a run at a title at any weight class, whether that be 25 or 35. So at this point, if you're not going to make a run for the title, what are you really sticking around for? What are you there to do? So good call on his part to hang up the gloves. It sounds as though he's got a gym that he's going to be opening out in England, so he's got a backup plan. Hopefully that ends up doing well for him, and hopefully he can build into a pretty big gym, and maybe we'll see him back in the octagon sometime soon with one of the fighters that he's trained up to get all the way to the UFC, and that'd be exciting. Pretty sad moment, though. I mean, it's not like I can't say that I'm like the biggest Brad Pickett fan. Obviously, you know who he is when he's on the card. You're like, okay, that's going to be a fun fight. He's a fun guy to watch, but to see him go out the way he went out, for him to be winning, to lose by knockout, you know, you got his opponent who's showing all the respect. He's choked up, so then you become choked up. It was really hard to see. It sucked to see it that way, but I expect Pickett to have a pretty good career as a coach. I think he's evolving from just kind of like a pure boxer to where he got his wrestling in. His top game in jiu-jitsu is pretty good. His guard passes are okay. He never really was like the most technical guy at any point in the game. Like on the feet, he was relatively boxing centric. Didn't throw a ton of kicks. Like to look for a couple big shots as opposed to throwing a bunch of huge combinations and setting his stuff up. On the ground, it's not like he was taking guys down. Well, he was taking guys down, but it's not like he was passing the guard and getting quick submissions. But overall, really, really crafty guy. Knows the game well, and I think there's a lot that he can teach a lot of younger fighters. So hopefully we see him in the octagon again soon, and hopefully it's in the corner of someone who's up and coming out of England. I did a couple of preview episodes on the NCAA Wrestling Championship, so now that it's over, I just want to make a quick run through as far as who I predicted at each weight class, who actually got there, and then obviously who won. I'll go in order from weight class from bottom to top. So in the actual championship, it went from 97, 285, and then 125 up to 184. I'll just go 125 all the way up to 285 for just consistency's sake. So at 125, I had predicted that Thomas Gilman and Joey Dance would meet each other in the finals. Joey Dance got knocked off pretty early in the tournament. Thomas Gilman got to the semifinals against Darian Cruz, was probably about 10 seconds away from winning that match. Cruz caught a single leg, got him down, almost won the match at that point. Gilman, really quick escape, kind of surprising, as a matter of fact. He got out, they went to overtime, sudden victory, and Cruz was able to get another takedown, and he won the match, and Gilman ended up finishing third. So I was 0 for 2 in the finalists there, and then Darian Cruz, after beating Thomas Gilman, was able to beat Ethan Lezak for the finals. In the 133-pound class, I picked Nathan Tomasello and Cade Brock to be in the finals. Those two were both in the semifinals. Nathan Tomasello went against Corey Clark. Cade Brock went against Seth Gross. Tomasello was looking pretty good against Corey Clark, but he got the first takedown of the match. But then the next couple takedowns that he shot on, he got really deep on his single leg. It looked like he was probably going to be able to finish, but Corey Clark had this really interesting headlock type of position that he used where he would defend the single leg, get to a headlock, and get 2 points right off of it. He was able to do that both times, which was pretty surprising, and ended up getting a bit of an upset win over Nathan Tomasello. As far as the Cade Brock and Seth Gross match goes, that was a match that I had assumed would be in the semifinals. Gross had won the first time. Gross is extremely tough on top. I'd imagine that'd probably be an issue again, but I thought that Cade Brock would be able to get to his offense. He'd be the one dictating the pace. That wasn't the case. Gross was able to get to his offense first, and he won that match by major decision. And then in the finals, Seth Gross was doing pretty well. Got the first takedown, but Corey Clark was able to get him down late in the third period and ride him all the way out, and was able to get the victory by doing so. So really, really exciting match there. I gotta admit, I'm a big Iowa fan, so to see Corey Clark win a title in his final year, you know how tough it was for him to lose in the finals the last couple of years, and for him to go through the injuries he went through. I figured that'd be enough to stop him, but man, it wasn't. He fought through it all. Really gritty performance, really tough performance. Just great job by him, and it's really cool to see him end his career as a champion. At 141, I picked Dean Heil against Joey McKenna in the finals, with Heil winning. McKenna also, like Joey Dance, got knocked off early. Heil, like I had mentioned, wins a lot of close matches, but he finds ways to win. That's exactly what happened. He got to the finals against George DiCamillo and was able to win that match as well. So he's undefeated this year, two-time champion now. Not exactly the most exciting guy, a bit of a guy who's easy to cheer against for college wrestling, but good on him for getting the win. At 149, I picked Zane Rutherford to go against Anthony Colica. Rutherford has been the most dominant guy at 49, and that didn't change at all. He just stormed his way through the entire tournament. Colica, on the other hand, very surprising performance from him. Not only did he not make the finals, but he didn't even make it to the All-American stand. He got beat early, he got beat often, and just not a great performance out of him. So Zane Rutherford got to the finals, and I mean, just the performance that he put on against Levon Mays was outstanding. Mays looked pretty good early. He got an early takedown, but from there he couldn't do much. Rutherford was incredibly dominant. At 57, I predicted that Nolf and Kemmerer would be in the finals. Kemmerer got caught in a bit of a weird pin by Dylan Palacio. He ended up working his way back to third place. So that opened the door at Jason Nolf's weight class for Joey LaValle. But again, Nolf, just like Zane Rutherford, has been so dominant in his weight class, and that really didn't change. So that was another win for Penn State. And to keep things going with that, at 165, I predicted Isaiah Martinez against Daniel Lewis. Vincenzo Joseph got out of that draw, not Daniel Lewis. Lewis ended up finishing as an All-American, but he didn't get into the finals. And that was a match that had happened a couple times already. You figured that Joseph would probably lose, just like he had in the past, but he got out to an early lead in the third period. Martinez was down. He needed a takedown. Got a little bit aggressive on the upper body. He got put on his back and got pinned in the third period, and it was just a huge upset. So for Martinez, a guy who looked like he was on track to be a 4-time national champion, now at best he's going to be a 3-time champ, which isn't bad at all. But I mean, it's not exactly what he was going for, and it sucks for him. But really exciting for Vincenzo Joseph as a freshman to see what he can do. Obviously, Martinez will be back next year. Martinez could definitely get him back next year, as a matter of fact. But that weight class got a lot more interesting right now. At 174, I predicted Mark Hall would be going against Bo Jordan in the finals. That's exactly what happened. Mark Hall went against Bo Jordan in the finals. Very close match in the semifinals against Zahid Valencia. It looked like Valencia was about to get a late takedown that would have won him the match, but in the process, he had grabbed Mark Hall's headgear. Good call by one of the assistant coaches for Penn State. They reviewed it and gave Mark Hall the point. Hall ended up winning that match. Then he went through to go against Bo Jordan in the rematch of the Big Ten finals that Bo Jordan won. And Mark Hall won it this time, much like I had expected. So, same type of thing for him. He's a freshman. Looks like he's got a lot of great opportunities ahead of him. He's pretty small for the weight class, so it'll be interesting to see if he bulks up and gets bigger at 74, if they try to move around at any point. I don't think they would because they've got champions at all the weight classes surrounding him, so it's not like he'd really be pushing anyone away. Speaking of which, at 184, I predicted Miles Martin versus Gabe Dean. My prediction was kind of hinging on Sammy Brooks going down early so Martin could get through there and go to nickel, and Martin seems to be the only guy. I guess Gabe Dean's capable of beating nickel, but outside of that, Martin seems to be the only other guy who can really give nickel a tough time, but Martin got dropped early. So Sammy Brooks got through to the semifinals. He lost to Bo Nickel. Gabe Dean won his half pretty easily, much like I had expected outside of a close match with a guy from Old Dominion. I think Decow or Dechow. But that was a close match in the finals. Nickel was able to get a takedown. Gabe Dean was very close at the end. Almost had him on his back, almost had Nickel on his back, but couldn't secure the position, couldn't get the takedown, and Nickel was able to eke one out there to take away Gabe Dean's possibility of being a 3-time champion and become a champion for himself in his sophomore year. At 197, I predicted Jaden Cox versus Colin Moore. Colin Moore and Brett Farr were going at it 3 times this season already. First time Moore had lost big. Second time it was close, but Moore had lost. Third time Moore had won, so I figured Moore would keep that going and get the win over Farr, but Farr fought back, and Farr got the win over Moore. Pretty impressive match, a pretty high-scoring match at that, and then once they got to the finals, Jaden Cox, the Olympic bronze medalist, just wasn't anything to mess with. He was getting to his offense really well, won that match pretty clearly. Didn't get the major, but still was a very clear winner. You could tell from the start to finish he was going to win that match. So a 3rd title for him. His college career is done, and he's definitely got a lot more he can accomplish internationally as an Olympic bronze medalist. And speaking of Olympic medalists, in the final weight, I had picked Kyle Snyder versus Conor Medbury, with Kyle Snyder winning. Not exactly a ballsy pick there. I think it was pretty clear that those two are the best guys at the weight. Ty Walls was maybe the only other guy who could kind of break in and beat Conor Medbury, but Medbury got that match. Those two got to the finals, and Kyle Snyder was able to just kind of use his athleticism, use his skill, and get the win over Conor Medbury and become the 285 champion once again. With rumors of the T-Mobile Arena being booked for June for a potential fight between Conor McGregor and Floyd Mayweather in Las Vegas, we've gotten to a point where I think, as a lot of us MMA fans can probably attest to, it's getting a little bit annoying to constantly hear about this Conor and Floyd fight, yet you never hear about a date. You never hear about what the rule set's going to be, what each of them are going to be getting paid, who's going to be promoting it, whether it's going to be the money team, the UFC, a combination of both. If so, who's promoting it, what percentage of it. And really, what's the card going to look like on top of that? Are they going to fight in an octagon? Are they going to fight in a ring? Is it going to be like one of those Bellator kickboxing shows where you have the ring and you have the octagon, or in their case, the cage side by side, and they have fights going both ways? A lot of questions on it, and it's getting to the point where it's getting really frustrating. I feel like I've kind of turned a corner on this. For a while, it was just one of these things to me where it's like, this just isn't going to happen. You have too big of egos on each side. You don't want... On Floyd's side, he doesn't want to lose. He's got a 49-0 record. He's going to make everything in his favor. He's going to see himself as the A side, which he probably is the A side, especially for a boxing match. And he's going to want a lot more money a lot larger percentage of money, no less, than Conor's going to get, and Conor wouldn't agree to that. But I think at this point, I've gotten to the point where I think this fight is already, if the terms aren't already set, it's kind of determined that it's going to be made. One of the things that I'm noticing a lot, and I think is really brilliant on their part, is that even though this fight hasn't happened, it's been heavily promoted through press. The PR on this has been fantastic. They've constantly been in the news. Like every couple of weeks when you stop hearing about it, something new comes up that's minor and it brings the talks back. You're hearing about it on ESPN. You're hearing about it on a lot of the MMA sites, on the boxing sites, a lot of mainstream sites on top of that. This is something that keeps coming up, and for them, it's more hype that's being built towards a fight that hasn't even been booked yet. So once it finally does get booked, you've already got all this hype that's been built up without them really having to pay all that much to get it. And on top of that, I mean, aside from all the free advertising, you feel like by then, once they have the fight booked, give them a couple of months, let them advertise on top of that, and it's going to be a big event. But to me, it feels like at this point, they know it's going to happen. There's a lot of money to be made on both sides. And whatever the little story you hear between now and then is, whether it's like, oh, maybe it's going to be September, maybe it's June, maybe it's going to be at the T-Mobile Arena. All this really is it's free promotion that they're getting in the meantime, but this fight's going to happen. It's going to happen soon. Conor McGregor, again, love watching him MMA. I hope that if he does take a boxing match, that if things start going poorly, maybe he gets himself disqualified by doing some MMA stuff. Maybe he throws a spinning kick at Floyd. Maybe when Floyd likes to clinch up when you start to corner him, maybe Conor trips him or throws some elbows at him just for the sake of it. That'd be kind of fun to see, but it looks like this fight's going to happen. I'm under the strong impression right now that every little piece of news that you hear between now and then is really just promotion. And it's a nifty play on their part in order to get this promotion. But this fight's going to happen soon. You can count on it. The September date sounds pretty reasonable, I think, especially with Conor talking about having his kid. The kid is due to come in May. So that'll give him a few months to train afterwards, just in pure boxing. Looks like he's still been training MMA in the meantime. You have some videos that come out with him doing some cool grappling stuff, but Conor will be in soon. Floyd will be in against him. It's going to be a pretty dumb fight. I think from a technique standpoint, it's really not going to be the most interesting thing ever. Floyd's he's a superior striker, really. He's a superior boxer. If they're in a boxing-only fight, you'd have to imagine he'll have a pretty easy time. Hopefully Conor doesn't take too much damage in the fight if it does go that way. Again, it'd be, like I said, I think that's probably the best way for it to end is if Conor does get himself disqualified, because then he's not taking too much damage. He's still showing that a lot of the MMA techniques would be very effective, and everyone walks away with a really big paycheck, and hopefully on the undercard, some good guys get to show themselves off, whether that's your Anderson Silva versus Roy Jones Jr. type of fight, if it's going MMA versus boxing in a boxing ring, or if they do that Dynamite type of show where they have some MMA fights, so you get a really big audience. Maybe you get a guy like Demetrius Johnson on that undercard, give him another chance to show himself off. I think at that point, he'd either be breaking Anderson Silva's record or he'd freshly broken it. If he'd freshly broken it, then maybe you can get a super fight with him that can serve as a co-main event. There are a lot of options there, but it's going to happen. Between now and whenever that fight's officially booked, you might as well just assume that it is free promotion that you're hearing when it's a little story, whether it's in regards to a venue being booked or terms being close or anything to that effect. It's just essentially free promotion for them. They're using the PR really well, and they're getting on a lot of big mainstream networks doing so. On last Monday's episode of the MMA Hour, Mighty Mouse came on and it talked about a handful of things. A lot of it included how he felt like he was being treated by the UFC, how he felt that they were pushing him. Talked a little bit about Tyron Woodley as well, how he felt like there were some of the things that Woodley had been saying about race that might have... He didn't really go too in-depth with them, but he said he kind of gets where Woodley's coming from on them. And was also talking about how he's starting to build a pretty big following with Twitch and how he feels like the UFC could be doing a better job of marketing him. So, to me, this really brought up a thought that I've been having for a while, and I feel like just like the fighter pay debate, this is one that I'm going to be going over multiple times, but it's one that I keep hearing, and it's one that's really under my skin. It's something that I feel like is a common misconception. It's untrue, and people need to get it straight. So this is something that I hear a lot, especially from Brendan Schaub, where there's this term, the marketing machine, the UFC marketing machine, the UFC building a star, the UFC built you, the UFC built this guy, the UFC didn't want to help build that guy, the UFC... It's just over and over you hear these terms, and it's like, I don't think people who say these things know what the hell they're talking about. So if you're looking at the UFC and their standpoint, first off, this idea that the UFC builds anybody, that's false. The UFC, what they can do is they can put their promotional budget forward, they can put their connections forward, and they can give people a platform. But if the fans don't latch onto them, the fans don't latch onto them. It's not like the UFC was like, you know what, let's make Conor McGregor huge and make nobody else huge. And oh crap, look at us now. Now Conor McGregor wants to have a piece of the pie, and now we're screwed. The UFC doesn't do that by design. They wouldn't do that by design. What the UFC does is when they have guys who are entertaining, whether they're entertaining fighters, whether they're entertaining on the mic, whether they're compelling characters, they'll give them an opportunity to show themselves, whether it's on TV shows, whether it's on their big fight cards that get to a lot of people, whatever it is, they're going to try to push them forward. But from there, the fighter actually has to take the next step. The UFC, they'll give you a fishing rod, they'll put you in the lake, but at that point, you've got to catch the fish. And that's the thing that they do. They'll put you forward, and then they'll see, okay, well, how do the fans take to them? Is this a good investment for us? If we paid $250,000 to put Mighty Mouse's face all over the place, is he going to sell a bunch of pay-per-views and help us make that money back? If yes, then we're going to start spending even more money and just keep pushing that investment further. But if not, then they're not going to invest a whole lot more. So with Mighty Mouse, he was a guy where he's been put on a lot of co-main events of really big fights. So it's one of those things where a lot of people are already going to be watching the card. You get Mighty Mouse on the card. You have the whole feature beforehand where you're telling everyone how big Mighty Mouse is, how good he is, how he's winning all his fights. They put him on Fox, which generally a great pay-per-view card. If it gets 500,000 buys, that's a big night for them. For a Fox card, a bad one gets 2 million views. So you're getting out there to a lot of people. You're on network TV. No one's having to pay for it. It's a lot easier to see. Again, everyone at the bar can see you there. It's a good opportunity for you. And again, with Mighty Mouse, they've also put him in a lot of those preview shows on Fox as well, where they're previewing to the fights. They've done the cross-promotion with the NFL, where if you're looking at MMA, their core demographic is males 18 to 34. The NFL also shares that demographic largely. They tend to skew a little bit older as well, but you're going to get a lot of people in that core demographic just watching the NFL games. They're putting advertisements out for him on those events when he was fighting on Fox. And with all the opportunities that they gave him, he just didn't really stick. And that's why the UFC isn't constantly throwing more and more money at him and pushing him even further and trying to make him a giant star, because they've already done that. They've already given him a chance to connect to a lot of fans, and fans just aren't really connecting to him. Now, for him, I like what he's doing with the video games. I think that's actually a very good thing. Another thing you hear a lot with fighter promotion is this talk of, well, you just have to talk shit to sell fights. You just have to be an asshole if you want people to be interested. And that's not the case. You have to be different. You don't necessarily have to talk shit. Now, talking shit can be different. If you're very good at talking shit, that can be different and that can stick out. But if you're a guy like Mighty Mouse and you're really big into video games, you can still represent the video game guy, be the guy that has like the video game community behind you, and work off of that and still try to look for some mainstream support as well. And that's something that Mighty Mouse is doing right now and something that I support him in. But again, the core demographic of people who are going to be interested in MMA and follow MMA closely, and the core demographic of people who are going to watch other people play video games on Twitch, I don't know if there's necessarily the biggest overlap there. So for the UFC to take out $100,000 and put a huge campaign into Mighty Mouse on Twitch with the hopes that helps their core business, I don't know. I don't know that that's the best move for them, so I can see why they haven't really pushed that hard in that area. But again, for Mighty Mouse and for a lot of these other fighters, the UFC doesn't not want people to be stars. They love to have more stars. Stars are really the big selling point for them. When they can have one event with Ronda Rousey headlining it and the next event with Conor McGregor, that's a lot better for them than where they're at right now, where they're having Jermaine Durandamy versus Holly Holm headline a show in Brooklyn. And then following that up with a show where you've got Tyron Woodley and Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, which again is a great fight, but it's not like that fight's selling fantastically. And so I think that's really something you have to look at. Even with Tyron Woodley, he feels like he's not getting enough of a push. The UFC there's nothing that benefits the UFC if Tyron Woodley doesn't become a big star. If he becomes a big star, that's helpful to them. They want that. They want more big stars. And a guy like Woodley, he's got the look. He's a college-educated guy. He can talk well. But you got to be able to connect with the fans. You've got to be able to draw people in. And there are a couple of things that are really important to understand as far as becoming a big mainstream success. So first off is the UFC, they've got two kind of main fan bases. So they've got the hardcore fans. This is probably about 10% of their really big shows. And they've got the casual fans, which is like the 90%. So for one, you have to be interesting to the casual fans, but it's also important that you have to be interesting to the hardcore fans, because a lot of times the hardcore fans are the ones who are going to sell the fight. So for example, I'm definitely a hardcore MMA fan, but I have a lot of friends who aren't. But these are the friends who I watch a lot of my fights with. So to get them to come out to me with a bar on a Saturday night and watch the fights as opposed to going anywhere else or doing anything else, I have to be able to sell to them why this specific fight is worth it, why you want to watch this specific fight. For Conor McGregor, it's easy because he draws so much interest. All I really have to say is Conor McGregor, and they already know. But if you're looking at a guy like Tyron Woodley or even Mighty Mouse Johnson, if I'm going to my friends and I'm saying, hey, Mighty Mouse is fighting, he's a great fighter, they're like, yeah, everyone in the UFC is a great fighter. What else? He plays video games and people like to watch him playing video games. Again, that's not a selling point. That doesn't make my job any easier to get my friends to watch the fights, and it's going to make it tougher for more people on the outside to even be interested in the first place. Same thing with Woodley. Like a lot of things that he talks about, he's like, oh, well, I've been in some movies and I'm college educated, and it's kind of like the same type of thing. If I go to my friends and I say, hey, Tyron Woodley's fighting tonight, he's a really, really fun, exciting fighter, best welterweight in the world, like, okay, well, usually there's going to be one of the best weight guys in his weight class in the world that's fighting on a Saturday night. I get that. What else? And if my next thing's like, he was an extra in a big movie. Okay. He graduated college. Yeah, so did I. Okay. Like these aren't really things that are going to sell it all that well. So I think it's really important for guys like Mighty Mouse, really guys, even if you're not a champion, for one, you have to be interesting to the hardcore fans, but you've also got to be someone who can capture the casual fan base too. And remember, as a hardcore fan, I'm going to be the guy who's helping sell things for you. So don't give me something weak like, oh, I graduated college or I'm really popular on Twitch. That's not something that's going to capture a lot of the casual audience. And if you can't capture the casual audience, you're not going to be a huge pay-per-view star like Ronda Rousey was, who was able to capture, I mean, men and women, really, both for her looks and her attitude. And obviously her attitude became her undoing, but just that strong female attitude, don't be a do-nothing bitch, like that really caught on with a lot of people. And Conor McGregor, he's got the country behind him. Now, as an American, that's a really tough move to pull because there are so many great Americans that just being American isn't enough. I think if you're going to go for the regional thing, you might want to just kind of stick to your state or stick to your city and just accept that and work off of that. So, for example, if you're Chris Weidman, he likes to walk out with the American flag. I'd rather see him walk out with the New York flag. You're not going to, yes, you were an All-American wrestler, but you grew up in New York. You went to college in New York. You were an All-American wrestler in New York. You used to live in New York. Be the New York guy. Don't be the America guy. That's what I would say to him. But even still, with there being so many great Americans, it's tough. Now, people like to say that Americans aren't all that nationalistic. I don't agree with that. If you look at sports like tennis, for example, in the past, you look at the U.S. Open, a lot of times you have guys like Roger Federer, who's from Switzerland, Novak Djokovic from Serbia, Rafael Nadal from Spain. These guys are all usually at the top. When an American breaks through and they actually become a real threat and have a chance to get deep in the tournament, especially Andy Roddick over 10 years ago when he was able to get all the way through, Americans got really interested in it. It's just that when you have a sport with so many Americans at the top, being American really isn't as big of a thing. Whereas for the Irish, their only guy at the top seems to be Conor McGregor. Joe Duffy's good, but he's not quite at that title level yet. Even with Canada, like when they had GSP and Roy, when GSP retired, Canadian MMA dropped off pretty significantly. Like the UFC wasn't able to go there and do as many shows because there wasn't as much interest. So Conor's got that going for him. He's got the country behind him. But if you're an American fighter, which most UFC fighters are American, if you're American, if you're trying to work your way up, you got to be interesting. You've got to find something unique about you that I, as a hardcore fan, can tell my friends to get them to say, you know what, I don't watch every fight, but this one sounds interesting. I'm going to see this one compared to the others. And it can't just be what you do in the octagon. There's got to be something more and something that's interesting on top of that. Following his most recent suspension, Chael Sonnen decided to start up a podcast and get into that game with Podcast One. So he's got a podcast called Youre Welcome. Started off where it was just him on his own. He'd talk for 1 hour a week. Eventually that became an hour episode twice a week, and now they're at a point where it's 3 times a week, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Like I said, at first it was just him talking to the mic, and he started to bring guests on. And a lot of times when he'd go to the studio, he'd bring one of his good friends that he grew up with and knew really well, Joel Supernaw, with him. Joel, his most notable contribution to the game is that he's been in the car business a lot. He used to wrestle in college, but he'd owned some car dealerships, and when Team Quest was getting started, they started off training in the back of his car dealership, so he provided that for him and has been involved with Team Quest and a lot of that, but he hasn't really fought a whole ton. He fought a fight with Wes Sims where he lost in about 34 seconds by triangle. It sounds as though he's looking to fight Wes Sims again this year, sometime out in Portland. But his role on the show is more just kind of to be a guy that Chael can bounce ideas off of, to hear things off of. He likes to kind of create his own segments. He had his thing that he called the Nicky Bones, for example, where it's just like a way to get fans involved. But his role on the show really is kind of to be himself, which is a bit of an oaf, a bit of an idiot at times, and it's kind of funny to see it. And Chael, obviously being the guy he is really good at bringing it out of him. But every so often, Joel realizes that he's the oaf, and he doesn't like it, so he blows up on Chael. And on their last episode on Friday, he had a really big blow up where he had walked out of the studio for a quick second, popped back in, and was kind of pouty the rest of the time. It sounded as though he was talking a lot about how he's like, if this is the last time I'm here, so be it. I don't care. I don't want you treating me like shit anymore. And Chael was just egging him on the whole time. And it's actually a really funny clip to listen to. You'd have to go to Podcast One to listen to it, and I'd recommend listening to the whole episode. I think the podcast in itself is a really good podcast. It's a really entertaining podcast. Chael's got a lot of interesting takes on what's going on in the MMA world. A lot of times you can tell that he isn't entirely sure of what's going on. He'll kind of read a headline and go into a full take based off of that, as opposed to really doing all his research. But there are definitely some things where he's got good insider knowledge and has really good takes on it. So I recommend listening to that podcast. And for starters, it'd probably be an entertaining one to listen to the one from Friday with him and Joel blowing up on each other. But as far as whether or not I think Joel is going to be gone and Chael's going to go back to doing this on his own, I don't think that's the case. Joel has blown up on Chael before for the same type of reason. I think these guys, they've been friends for a while. They'll get over it. They'll work past it. They'll get back into another cycle, I'm sure, where Chael's a little bit nicer to him, but then over time he hits on Joel being the oaf. Joel doesn't like it anymore, and he might blow up again, but it seems like this is just kind of standard fare for them. The fact that this happened on a Friday, and now we're waiting all the way from Friday to Wednesday over a 5-day period to see, are these guys done together? Are they coming back? Will Joel be back for the next episode? What's it going to be like? Are they going to still be angry at each other? How's that going to go? Knowing Chael's really good about playing these types of games, so it's possible that this might have been I guess they like to use a lot of pro wrestling terms, so there's a chance it might have been a work. I know Joel was yelling, it's a shoot, it's not a work, which I thought was kind of funny for him to be saying, but it seems like everything will be fine there. It's just a funny little sequence between them. It's definitely cool to listen into the drama, and I'll be listening to the podcast regardless, because like I said, it's a high-quality podcast, but it'll be fun to see. The IBJJF Pan American Championships were held over the weekend. So for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, they kind of do it sort of similar to tennis and golf in a way where they have their Grand Slam tournaments where the Worlds is the big one for them, but they've also got the Pans, they've got the European Championships, and they've got a few other ones around the world that are kind of ahead of the other tournaments as far as their prestige compared to like a Chicago Open, for example. So the Pans I think they're considered probably the number 2 tournament outside of the world. So a big tournament, you get a lot of the best guys in the world to come out there and compete in it. Outside of the black belt division, which is what I'll end on, as far as who won in the black belts, there were some other interesting stories. One of them was that there was an NFL defensive tackle who competed at super heavy for white belt and won the division, which isn't terribly surprising. One of the places that I used to train out in Iowa at the University of Iowa, and we had a guy who had captained the Hawkeye football team at a time, and just going against him, like even guys who were a little more technically skilled, it's just so tough because those guys, especially the linemen, they're really tough to get down, so they're going to be on top. Got really wide bodies, so it's tough to control them, and they're really good at kind of controlling people in front of them, keeping them in front of them, keeping people from getting angles on them, because that's really what the defensive tackles are trying to do. They're trying to get around them, and overall that makes him really tough. So not really a big surprise that he was able to win at white belt. I think when he goes up to blue belt, he's going to be really difficult to beat there as well, and you win Pans as a white belt, you have to imagine that the blue belt is going to be wrapped around his waist pretty soon. MMA fighter and also an NCAA championship wrestler, Ed Ruth. He has 3 NCAA titles, one of the better wrestlers in America, but now he fights for Bellator. He competed at blue belt at his weight class and got second place. So again, same type of thing where a lot of these wrestlers, when you have such a great wrestling background, you can translate to jiu-jitsu really well, especially the lower belts. A lot of times, like when wrestlers come into jiu-jitsu, they think, oh, I've only done jiu-jitsu for 6 months or 8 months, and I'm already doing so great. But the thing is that when you've wrestled your whole life, that's all mat time. It's not exactly the same type of mat time where you're working the same exact stuff, but you're still working on your balance, you're still working on top control, you're working on positional control especially. So with a guy like Ed Ruth, he's spent his whole life wrestling, and not just that, but he's been exceptionally good at it. So for him to translate well to jiu-jitsu, getting on top of most of the guys and being able to control wasn't a huge surprise. So good things from him. Almost got a gold medal. It'd be cool to see him keep competing. I know afterwards he was talking about how he didn't like competing in the gi as much as he likes no-gi, so maybe it'd be cool to see him do a no-gi tournament as well, see how he does there. You'd figure that would have to benefit him. And then as far as the actual black belt division, I'll just go bottom up. So at Brewsterweight, Bruno Malfacini beat Lucas Pinheiro. At light feather, Joao Miao and Jose Tiago closed it out. Miao, I guess you'd say probably got the gold medal in that, but again, a closeout just means you have 2 teammates and they don't fight, and technically they both win. But that's one of the weird things about jiu-jitsu. You don't really have that at wrestling tournaments. Like if you have multiple Iowa wrestlers that are together in the Midlands tournament and they both meet each other in the finals, they're going to wrestle. They're not going to close it out as a team, but in jiu-jitsu you tend to see that a lot. At featherweight, Rubens Cobrinha Charles beat Osvaldo Mozinho. I'm not the best at pronouncing a lot of these names if I haven't already heard them a whole lot. I've seen the name a lot online, but I haven't actually heard it pronounced a whole lot, so not the best pronunciation there in the gold medal match. At lightweight, Lucas Lepre beat Marcio Andre. At middleweight, Otavio Souza defeated Isaac Bahianis, and he won that by flying triangle. At medium heavy, Patrick Gaudio beat Lucas Hulk Barboza. Heavyweight, Leandro Lowe beat Tanner Rice. Super heavyweight, Herber Santos beat Rodrigo Cavaca. And at ultra heavyweight, Joao Gabriel Rocha beat Gustavo Elias. And in the absolute division, Leandro Lowe won that as well. In what felt to me as a bit of a surprise signing, Dylan Dennis had signed with Bellator over the week. Dennis had talked about previously on Ariel Helwani's show that he was looking to take some MMA fights on some of the local promotions and work his way up. So I was under the impression that that's the path that he had put out for him. That's kind of the path he was going to follow. But it looks like Bellator came in and probably gave him a really good offer. And Bellator has been known to do this. They've signed a lot of really good wrestlers before they've made their debuts. They signed Ed Ruth right out of college. They signed Aaron Pico, who obviously didn't go to college, but he's been with the Olympic Training Center and training for the Olympic wrestling. Almost got to the Olympics this time around. Lost in, I believe it was the third match to Frank Molinaro, who went out to Rio this year. So for them to sign a guy like Dylan Dennis, who's got a spectacular jiu-jitsu background and hasn't had an MMA fight yet, that's not surprising for them, but it's just I thought he was going down a different path. Now, as far as Dennis goes and how he can fit into the MMA scene, I think he's actually going to be extremely successful. So here's the thing with jiu-jitsu. There are a lot of different ways that you can go about jiu-jitsu and how you can be good at it. There are guys who like to play off their back and are really good as far as like getting sweeps and submissions. There are guys who can play off their back and kind of get that one sweep or work the advantage and win a lot of close matches. You have some guys who like to play on the top, but aren't exactly, they have decent takedown games, obviously, to be able to get to the top, but they're more positional control guys. They aren't really big submission threats. There are a lot of different ways to do it. And for MMA purposes, typically, if you want to be really successful as a jiu-jitsu guy in MMA, first off, you got to be able to get the fight to wherever you need it. So if you're a guy who fights really well off of your back and you're a jiu-jitsu guy, a couple of your options either are to get really good at kickboxing, get really aggressive, and try to draw people to take you down, or get to the point where you can throw sloppy kicks and people aren't going to take you down off of it, just as long as you aren't opening up yourself to counters. Or even if you can clinch up and pull guard. Sometimes Damon Maya likes to get his takedowns, but if Maya's not able to take you down off a shot, he'll kind of pull guard and work a sweep off his back really quick to get on top. But usually if you like to play off your back, MMA, you can be successful as a jiu-jitsu guy in MMA who likes to play off your back, but you have to develop something else too. You can't really come in just with that skill set and be able to dominate right off the bat. You have to develop a little bit more to your game. And the other game that's really effective is one where you're able to get guys to the ground, control from the top, and then just kind of work your way through, pass to side mount or pass straight to mount, get the back, get the choker, get any other submission that you're able to find in the meantime. Jacare is really good at this, so he's got a really aggressive striking game, but once he gets in close, he'll shoot in. He'll chain his takedowns together if need be. He'll get on top, and then from there he just works his passing series and works into a position where he's able to finish quickly. Damian Maia, same type of thing. Like I said, he'll pull to his back if need be, but his game right now, especially the resurgence of it ever since he moved down to welterweight and has really gotten back into jiu-jitsu, is he goes for the takedowns. He's worked with Mark Perry on that, who is the head coach out of Illinois, a former national champion at the University of Iowa in the NCAA wrestling. So he's really put into a lot of effort into his wrestling. He's getting guys down, a very good takedown game. Mixes it in with his jiu-jitsu, so it's kind of like a bit of an unorthodox takedown game, but very effective at getting guys to the ground. And then he's got his passing sequence that works really well for him too. For Dylan Dennis, he has a wrestling background, so for him to be able to get the fight to the mat, that's not going to be a huge problem for him, and that's really a big problem for a lot of jiu-jitsu guys. So right off the bat, before he really digs deep in MMA, he's already got a skill set that's going to be effective. He can get people down, and once he has you down, he is a killer. He's extremely good on top, very good with his submissions, really creative with his submissions. And I can see him getting a lot of guys down early, especially in his first few fights, and being able to finish them early as well. At the higher levels, obviously his striking is going to have to improve, so he'll be able to close the distance better. And I'm not sure how his wrestling is going to stack up against some of the better wrestlers out there. But again, it'll be interesting to see. He's got a very good jiu-jitsu skill set for MMA. You know, there aren't a whole lot of guys that can say that. There are a lot of guys, even like a Mackenzie Dern, for example. Her jiu-jitsu skill set isn't exactly one that's going to translate perfect to MMA. And the women's game isn't as advanced as the men's game, so she's 3-0 at this point. She's had some close fights. She's had some tough fights at that, but she might get a little bit further than most people who have her type of jiu-jitsu game goes. But in men's MMA, you really have to be able to get the takedown or find ways to get the fight to the mat to a position where you're strong, and Dylan Dennis has that, and that's key. And I think because of that, he's going to be very effective early on. And depending on how hard he trains and how well he takes to striking, he could be a guy who maybe 4 or 5 years from now is a guy that we're talking about as one of the top welterweights of the world, or really whatever weight class he ends up competing at. He'll be one of the top guys in the world if he can really take this serious.
Yeah, there it is, the gay bomb.
A couple weeks ago, I did a breakdown between Arian Foster and Wolf. That was a fun little thing that had come up on social media where Arian Foster said that he could beat up a Wolf. Went viral, which was kind of surprising, where a lot of people were like, no, you wouldn't. The Wolf would kick your ass. He went on Joe Rogan's podcast. I did a little segment on it where I broke down the fight. I had a little clip from them on the podcast talking about it, and I put in my 2 cents on who I think would win. Now, obviously, Arian Foster isn't actually going to go into the wild and fight a Wolf, and this fight's just not one that's going to happen. And then a similar, I guess this is different because it's two humans, but another fun little celebrity beef that went a little bit viral in the past week was Alex Jones and Alec Baldwin. So last week, Alec Baldwin had a skit where he was acting as President Trump and was just making a little jab at Alex Jones, just kind of talking about how crazy he is. And Alex Jones didn't take too kindly to it, so he ripped on him during the show. And then what I thought was a really funny move is that afterwards he put out a 20-minute apology video, or at least it was titled an apology video. It was just saying Alex Jones apologizes to Alec Baldwin, but then you click on the video, he starts off by acting like it's an apology, but then he cuts off like about a minute and is like, actually, no, I'm doubling down, I'm not apologizing. I will fight you, Alec Baldwin. We're going to do this. And I actually think from an MMA standpoint, regardless, obviously these guys aren't going to fight it. I don't see anyone putting this fight together, although I'm still going to break it down anyway just for the fun of it, because why the hell not? But I thought it was a funny little move for him to get into a little bit of a shit-talking war with the guy, put out a fake apology, and then double down on it. Now, that's kind of similar to Conor McGregor's little line at UFC 205 where he said, after all the talking I've done, after everyone who I've pissed off, I want to say that I want to apologize. Then he paused, and he's like, to absolutely nobody. The double champ does what the fuck he wants. And that was a fun little line, but that was the line that he used after the fight. I think as a pre-fight hype thing, that's not a line that you've really seen that much. I've seen a lot of guys talk shit to each other leading up to a fight, but I've never seen anybody really go balls deep on a fake apology thing where he's like, you know what, I realize I'm out of line here, and then go on like a 20-minute rant afterwards about how you don't feel like you're out of line and you're going to double down on it. So I think that's a move that I'd like to see some MMA fighter use in the next couple of months or so, kind of to hype up a fight. I think it'd be a pretty fun one. Maybe after The Ultimate Fighter's done, Cody Garbrandt and TJ Dillashaw, one of them can pull that on each other. That'd be a pretty funny move for them to do. But as far as the Baldwin versus Alex Jones fight, if we're going to break it down, and I'll just do this relatively quickly, because again, I don't actually know if these guys have trained at all. I know Alex Jones is based out of Texas, pretty good friends with Tim Kennedy, so I'd assume if he had a fight with Alec Baldwin, he'd be training with him. He's younger, he's a lunatic. I'm sure he's probably taken plenty of supplements that USADA would have an issue with, and Jeff Nowitzki would probably have to pull him off to the side and be like, yo, you can't be doing this. Alec Baldwin, he's an older guy, out in New York right now, so I'm assuming if he were to take a fight, he'd probably be training with Renzo Gracie or so. And as far as if these guys actually fought, knowing nothing about what they're capable of, what sort of background they have, I know Billy Baldwin obviously was all over the NCAA wrestling championships. He was a former college wrestler, so you'd figure maybe Alex got some wrestling background. Or Alec has some wrestling background. Alex Jones. He's probably trained a couple of times. I don't know where he's at, but for the fun of it, I'd just like to say Alex Jones on the feet. The guy's a freak. He's a lunatic. He'd go until he goes unconscious. You can definitely see him doing that. And, you know, with the right hand, he'd probably call that the A-bomb for the Alex Jones bomb. And the left hand, maybe that'd be the gay bomb, like his old gay Bob rant on how they're putting water in, or how they're putting shit in the water that's making the frogs gay. So, fun little idea. I know they're never going to fight, obviously. It'd be funny to see like a celebrity MMA match. Celebrity MMA isn't really something that's ever kicked off. I know Jose Canseco did it in Japan where he fought, believe it was Hongman Choi was the fight. But we haven't really seen like any good celebrity MMA since. It seems like boxing kind of has that. Even with Soulja Boy and Chris Brown, when they were supposed to fight, that was going to be a boxing match, not an MMA fight. But hey, if these two guys could sign up for a celebrity MMA fight, it'd be pretty fun. It'd be pretty fun to see the promotion for it. Alex Jones obviously would cut some fantastic promos, and even if he's not a great fighter, there might be some promotional stuff that some of the fighters that are great fighters could learn from.
I don't like them putting chemicals in the water that turn the friggin' frogs gay. Do you understand that? Serious crap. I'm sick of being social engineered. It's not funny.